in his development of those abilities.
By 1517, Michel de Notre Dame turned 14 and was sent away to the ancient walled and towered city of Avignon to enroll in a curriculum of rhetoric, mathematics, music, and astronomy.
Nostradamus had unorthodox beliefs about astronomy because in his day, according to the Inquisition, they believed the earth was the center of the universe. The sun, everything revolved around the earth. He didn't believe that was so. And I think it was because of his visions of the future he was able to see a lot of these things. He came to the belief to know that the earth revolved around the sun and that there was much more to the universe out there.
It would not be for a quarter of a century that the Polish astronomer Copernicus would publish his theory of the solar system in a book called Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. Not yet 20 years old in 1522, Nostradamus, still a young student, would quickly progress to medical school.
I, Michel de Notre Dame, of the country of Provence, of the city of Saint-Valmais, have come to study at the University of Montpellier, of which I agree to observe the rules, the rights, and the privileges, both present and future.
At age 19, Nostradamus was enrolled in the University of Montpellier, which was considered one of the major medical colleges of the day. Also, most of the faculty was of Jewish background, so he fit right in, and much of the learning, much of the education, the scholars of the day, this was the center for medical research.
In medical practice of the 16th century, astrology came first. The doctors had to know astrology, had to be able to apply it, and they certainly had to know the birth date and the geographical location of the birth of the patient. That was all important. The diagnosis was done primarily through the astrological signs and portents.
One of his aspects of education was not only in the science of healing, but also the metaphysics of healing, because he realized that it was not simply the healing of the body that was important, it was also a healing of the spirit and the soul.
A prodigious student, Michel de Notre Dame received his medical degree after only 3 years and was honored with the four-cornered hat of a physician. But he was yet to be known as Nostradamus.
Upon his graduation as a physician from the University of Montpellier, Michel de Notre Dame would take the Latinized version of his name. Notre Dame, Our Lady, would become Nostradamus.
The year that Nostradamus obtained his medical license, an epidemic of the plague was devastating southern France. A chilling description of such an epidemic was left behind by Nostradamus' son, César.
Persons stricken by the furor of this malady completely abandon all hope of recovery. Their houses are abandoned and empty, men disfigured, women in tears. The stretcher bearers work on credit. César de Notre Dame, 1546.
In the day of Nostradamus, of course, one of the greatest fears of everyone was being afflicted by the plague. It was almost universally fatal. When it hit a family, the whole family would go. They didn't know what the cause of it was. It was spread by rats, and the rats fleas, of course. And Nostradamus and other physicians were busy every minute of every day, and they traveled all over Europe ministering to the sick.
At that time that Nostradamus was living, the plague actually was considered a series of different kinds of diseases. But the most prevalent was what was called the charbon, which was the Black Plague. And unfortunately, most of the medical doctors at that time had no method whatsoever of combating it. Most of them dressed in horrible-looking garb made out of leather, soaked in garlic, and they had treated their patients with potions made of mercury.
Medical science at the time was crude. Thousands died not only from the disease itself, but from the practice of bloodletting and other treatments of primitive doctors.
If Nostradamus had never predicted anything, he would be remembered as one of the great healers of the 16th century. He had many progressive ideas about hygiene. He would not bleed his patients. He would make sure when he came into a town that the people had clean water, that any corpses in the streets would be immediately removed. He would often come into a town and send people out to collect rose petals to make his famous rose pills.
Of course, in Nostradamus' time, there was no such thing as the science of pharmacy. There weren't any pharmacists, and every doctor had to mix his own chemicals to make his own medications. It had to be done at the right phase of the moon, with the stars and the planets in just the right juxtaposition. Otherwise, they thought that it wouldn't be effective.
Nostradamus used lozenges that was composed of ground up not only the rose petals but also the rose hips, which contains the ascorbic acid, which is what we use today in vitamin C, which we know is something that fights infections.
When he was 52, Nostradamus wrote down the formula of his rose lozenges.
300 to 400 red roses, plucked before dawn, are pulverized and mixed with sawdust from the greenest cypress, iris of Florence, cloves, odorated calamus root, and linaloes. Nostradamus, 1555.
Little more is known of his remedy, but his cure rate was impressive. Some hold that another secret was a belief in cleanliness.
He was able to avoid contracting the plague himself because he practiced hygiene himself. And this is one thing that he insisted on, that for himself, before going into the patient, that he himself was clean as well as the patient themselves were clean.
Nostradamus enjoyed a growing reputation as he traveled throughout France treating the plague.
While Nostradamus was traveling throughout southwest France, he received word from Jules César Scaliger, one of the leading scholars of the day, that he wanted to meet with him and to communicate with him and basically just share the knowledge and wisdom together. And so he invited Nostradamus to his hometown of Agen. And Nostradamus accepted the invitation, and the two of them got on quite well.
Scaliger seems to have inherited Cicero's ability in eloquence, Virgil's in poetry, and Galen's twice over in medicine. I owe him more than anyone else in the world. Nostradamus, 1552.
It was, in fact, at Scaliger's home in Agen that, at the age of 30, Nostradamus was married. Strangely, his wife's name has been lost to history.
Nostradamus' first marriage bore him children. His wife was apparently very much beloved. It was a marriage of love rather than convenience. And unfortunately, while he was away, probably in Italy at the time, the plague swept through that particular part of Provence, and we returned to find that his entire family had fallen victim to the plague. He lost all of them.
It was a bitter irony that his medical skill could not be used to save his own family. His reputation suffered along with his heart. If Nostradamus was indeed a prophet, he knew then there would soon be change. Until this point in his life, Nostradamus was known only as a healer and an intellectual. But the death of his wife and children from the plague marked a time of deep introspection and personal change. No one could have foreseen that when he emerged from this period, Nostradamus would be called a prophet. In 1538, while Nostradamus was still living in the south of France, he was informed that officials of the Inquisition wanted to question him. Wisely, he chose to avoid